So I want you to picture two apartments. Just visualize this for a second. They are in the exact same city, the exact same neighborhood, and the rent is virtually identical.
Okay, I am picturing it.
Right. So walk inside the first apartment. This one belongs to someone earning, let's say, $95,000 a year. And it is just visually overwhelming.
Like completely packed with stuff.
Oh, totally packed. There's a massive, like 75-inch television mounted on the wall. They have this huge leather sectional that probably cost around $4,000.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And the kitchen is just stuffed with appliances. I'm talking half of them are literally still in their original boxes.
Ah, the classic impulse buys.
Exactly. And the spare bedroom is essentially just a climate-controlled storage unit for things they haven't touched in years.
Right, right.
But the real tragedy is what happens when this person actually checks their bank accounts. Their stomach just drops. Because they are earning nearly six figures, right? But they are exactly 2 missed paychecks away from a total financial crisis.
I mean, that is an incredibly common scenario, unfortunately.
Yeah.
And it really highlights this massive disconnect in how we view success. Because high income usually just masks high stress.
It really does. So hold that image of the stressed high earner and now walk into the second apartment next door. This person earns $52,000 a year.
So almost half as much.
Almost half. But inside, there is just breathing room. A modest couch, a normal-sized TV.
Like an actual living space, not a warehouse.
Exactly. A kitchen that only has the tools they actually use to cook. A closet with only clothes they genuinely wear. And the spare bedroom is, shocker, an actual bedroom.
Imagine that.
Right. But here's the kicker. When this person checks their bank account, they feel complete calm. They have 18 months of living expenses saved up, and they're investing 20% of every single paycheck.
Same neighborhood.
Yeah.
Half the income. Exponentially more financial security.
That paradox right there, that is the entire mission of our deep dive today. We are pulling from some really fantastic insights recently shared by Alicia Invests, and we're going to decode the hidden, honestly kind of psychological relationship between the stuff we own and the money we keep.
It's such a fascinating topic because society constantly feeds us this narrative that, a higher income automatically equals a safety net. But the math in this 2-apartment scenario completely dismantles that assumption.
It really does. So why is that? Why is the $95,000 earner going broke?
Well, to understand that breakdown, we have to look at the psychological trap they've fallen into. This person isn't necessarily making these glaring, catastrophic financial errors.
Like they aren't racking up massive gambling debts or anything.
Exactly. It's not a sudden disaster. What we are observing is the really insidious nature of lifestyle accumulation. They have slowly, almost invisibly, built an infrastructure of living that requires absolutely every single dollar they earn just to sustain its baseline.
Oh, man. It's the death by 1,000 cuts. It's like a subscription here, an upgraded car lease there, a bigger couch because you moved into a place with a bigger living room.
Yeah, and conversely, the $52,000 earner has realized that owning less doesn't equate to living worse. I mean, it equates to living deliberately. By restricting the sheer volume of things they have to manage, they actually create financial margin.
This is the total paradigm shift.
Completely. You stop obsessing over working harder just to buy more objects, and you start focusing on how those objects are actually draining your current resources.
Which brings us to this core illusion, keeping that high earner trapped. It's how we fundamentally perceive the act of buying. We treat purchasing a physical item as this one-and-done transaction, right? You swipe the card, you own the thing, end of story.
But that is so rarely the case.
Right. Digging into the Alicia Invests material, it feels much more akin to adopting a pet.
Oh, I love this analogy.
It's so good, right? You go to the shelter, you pay the $50 adoption fee, and you walk out thinking, hey, I just got a dog for $50.
When in reality, you just signed a 15-year financial contract.
Exactly. Premium food, vet bills, heartworm medication, dog walkers. The shelter fee was basically just the cover charge. And it seems like every single physical object we bring into our homes carries this exact same invisible, second cost.
Yeah, that analogy just perfectly captures the danger of the initial purchase price. The number on the receipt, that's just the first cost. The second cost is this massive invisible shadow that follows the item home.
And the sources break the second cost down into 4 components, right?
You do. And the first one is storage. Think about a treadmill.
Oh, the classic clothes hanger.
Right, the $800 clothes hanger. It takes up roughly 20 square feet of floor space. Well, in most urban areas, residential space costs about $30 to $50 per square foot annually.
Wait, so do the math on that?
That means you are paying up to $1,000 a year in implicit rent just to house a machine that you aren't even using.
That is insane. You are literally renting space to your own possessions.
You are. And then there is the maintenance component. That's the second one. If someone buys, say, a $30,000 boat and parks it in their driveway, the industry rule of thumb is that annual maintenance runs about 10% of the boat's value.
So $3,000 a year?
$3,000 a year for winterization, insurance, registration, and that's even if that hull never actually touches a lake.
You're paying for it just to exist on your property.
Exactly. Then we get to the third component, which is opportunity cost. And honestly, this is the one that destroys long-term wealth.
Because of compound interest.
Right. Imagine a $15,000 home gym setup. You didn't just buy a gym. You diverted $15,000 away from, say, an index fund. Over 15 years, with compound interest, that money could have grown to $50,000 or more.
Wow, so you traded away decades of future financial freedom for some weights that are probably just getting dusty.
Exactly. And finally, the fourth component is mental energy. Neurological studies actually show that visual clutter directly spikes cortisol levels.
That's our primary stress hormone, right?
Yep. It spikes cortisol and dramatically reduces our ability to focus.
That neurological aspect is so fascinating to me. So On a subconscious level, the brain is scanning a messy room and interpreting all that physical stuff as like uncompleted tasks.
Basically, yeah. It has to be cleaned, it has to be organized, insured, worried about.
So our possessions are literally keeping our nervous systems in a low-grade state of threat.
Our brains are simply not evolved to process that density of artificial stimuli. Every single object demands a tiny slice of your cognitive bandwidth.
Okay, so if you are listening to this right now and looking at a closet full of beautiful, expensive clothes, you might be feeling a little guilty. I mean, if every single item carries this massive, invisible, ongoing cost, how do we ever justify treating ourselves?
It can feel a bit intense at first.
Right. Does this ruthless, calculating mindset just strip all the joy out of making money? Because calculating the, what they call the cost per use of everything just sounds exhausting.
Well, it actually does the opposite, surprisingly. It redirects your resources toward things that genuinely elevate your life. The cost per use metric isn't about forced deprivation. It's a mathematical tool designed to neutralize emotional marketing.
Okay, walk me through that. Let's look at that closet full of clothes.
Sure. So if you buy a beautifully tailored $400 jacket and you wear it 200 times over 5 years, the math dictates that jacket costs you $2 per wear.
Okay, $2 a wear. Not bad.
Not bad at all. Now imagine you grab a trendy, fast fashion jacket for $200 on a whim, but you only wear it twice before it falls apart or you just realize it's out of style.
That one costs you $100 per wear.
Exactly. The so-called expensive item is actually mathematically cheaper.
That completely reframes the concept of value. It's like a $2,000 mattress that you use every single night for 10 years is pennies per use. It's an incredible investment in your health.
Oh, absolutely.
But a $300 specialized kitchen gadget you use twice a year is $150 per use. It's just a phenomenally inefficient deployment of your capital.
It strips away all the marketing hype and forces you to look at utility. But, that math is mostly for new purchases. To address the items already suffocating our closets, the Alicia Invests material introduces this really brilliant psychological tool.
The replacement test.
Yes, the replacement test. You look at an item gathering dust, say, a bread maker, and ask yourself, if this vanished tomorrow, would I actively spend my own money to go buy it again?
I'm going to guess the answer is almost universally no.
Which reveals something really profound about human psychology. If you wouldn't buy it again, the item actually holds negative value in your life.
Because it's just taking up space and bandwidth.
Right. The only reason you are keeping it is due to the endowment effect. That's a cognitive bias, where we overvalue things simply because we already own them. It exists in your home purely through inertia.
It's just draining your space and mental energy, so recognizing that bias allows you to ruthlessly clear those items out.
Exactly. Toss the dusty fondue set.
I am fully convinced to toss out the fondue set. But I want to play devil's advocate for a second regarding our technology and this intense pressure we all feel to constantly upgrade.
Oh, the tech trap.
Yes. The sources advise against ever upgrading out of boredom, but tech moves fast. My phone feels a little sluggish, the battery isn't great, and the new model has a significantly better camera. If I have the cash, how do we define what functional actually means without forcing ourselves to live in the Stone Age?
Well, the distinction here is crucial. Boredom is not mechanical failure.
Okay, that's a good phrase.
The desire for a novel experience, that dopamine hit of unboxing a shiny new camera, is not mechanical failure. Furthermore, the mere existence of a newer alternative on the market does not render your current device obsolete.
So the line is drawn at actual, verifiable failure.
Yes. If your phone connects to the network, sends your messages, and runs your necessary applications, it is fully functional. Upgrading for slightly better contrast on a screen or a slightly thinner bezel, that is wealth destruction disguised as progress.
Because we are battling a highly engineered dopamine loop.
Precisely. Tech companies know that the thrill of a new purchase fades rapidly. That fading feeling forces you back to the market to chase that high again.
And the financial toll of chasing that dopamine is just staggering. I mean, if the average person replaces an $800 to $1,000 phone every 2 years, and you project that out over a 30-year investing horizon,
It's massive.
they are burning between $30,000 and $50,000 of potential wealth.
Just on phones.
Just on phones. Apply that to cars and furniture, and you are casually throwing away hundreds of thousands of dollars over a lifetime.
But even knowing the math, the marketing is so predatory. The one-click checkout is literally frictionless. We are fighting our own biology at this point. We absolutely are. Human behavior inherently follows the path of least resistance. You cannot out-willpower a multi-billion-dollar marketing algorithm, especially, at the end of a long day when your prefrontal cortex is exhausted.
Right, you're just doom scrolling and buying stuff.
Exactly. So you have to engineer friction into your own life.
I love this concept of friction. You make the right choice, the easy choice, by making the wrong choice annoyingly difficult.
Yes.
Like deleting saved credit card numbers from your browser so you have to physically get off the couch to find your wallet, removing the shopping apps entirely from your phone.
And the most powerful friction point they suggest is enforcing a mandatory 24-hour waiting period for any non-essential purchase.
Statistically, forcing that delay eliminates what, roughly 70% of impulse buys?
Yeah, 70%. It works because it forces the emotional impulsive part of your brain to cool down. It gives your logical prefrontal cortex time to step in and evaluate the true cost.
Okay, so we add friction, we stop the 2 a.m. Amazon binges, and we refuse to upgrade perfectly fine laptops. But what about the sneaky accumulation?
The hobbies.
Yes, the new hobbies. The sources used a phrase that honestly hit me right between the eyes. They talked about avoiding becoming a, quote, museum of past enthusiasm.
Oh, the graveyard of abandoned identities.
Yeah.
The professional photography lighting kit in the basement. The expensive running gear you wore once.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly that. How does our brain trick us into thinking we are just buying one isolated item when we are actually funding an entire museum wing?
Well, you're referring to the Diderot Effect. It's a psychological phenomenon where acquiring one new possession creates this spiral of consumption to match it, because major purchases are never singular events, they're ecosystems.
Ecosystems, okay.
Yeah, think about when you buy a kayak. You aren't just buying molded plastic. You are committing to a roof rack, tie-down straps, a specialized life jacket, water shoes, and off-season storage.
So a purchase that looks like $500 on paper is actually a $1,500 ecosystem. So how do we test if our interest is genuine before we buy the whole ecosystem? The sources suggest renting or borrowing first, which makes total sense.
Rent the kayak 5 times.
Right. If you still want to wake up at 6 a.m. on a Saturday to go paddling, then maybe consider buying. You are testing whether you actually enjoy the activity or if you are just in love with the fantasy self who kayaks.
That is exactly it. The fantasy self is incredibly expensive. And even if you manage to avoid the large ecosystems, the insidious creep of smaller items still happens to all of us. This is where objective inventory comes in.
Counting your items, which honestly sounds borderline obsessive.
It does sound a bit intense,
Mhm.
but it is incredibly effective at breaking our brain's categorization bias.
Because our brains naturally chunk things together to save energy, right? Like if I ask you how many t-shirts you own, your brain doesn't visualize 40 individual shirts. It visualizes one abstract concept labeled my t-shirts.
Exactly. You might guess you have 10,
Mhm.
but when you physically count them and realize you own 47,
It shatters the abstraction.
it replaces a vague feeling with cold, hard data. When you know for a fact you own 47 shirts, standing in a store looking at a new one feels entirely different. You aren't just, quote unquote, picking up a shirt.
You are making the conscious, slightly absurd decision to acquire your 48th shirt.
Right. It makes the reality of your consumption impossible to ignore.
Let's zoom out here for a minute. Say a listener implements all of this. They add friction to their browser, they calculate the ecosystem costs, they conquer the Diderot effect, and they finally stop buying for their fantasy self. What is the ultimate endgame?
Well, it's not just having an empty apartment.
Right, it can't simply be about sitting in a stark, empty room feeling smug. This really seems to be about redefining the very nature of wealth.
It is entirely about redefining wealth, primarily by escaping what we call the high earner trap. The Alicia Invest sources point out that a professional earning $300,000 often reports the exact same level of financial anxiety as someone earning $80,000.
Which sounds absolutely insane to the person making $80,000.
Oh, completely. But it happens because of the hedonic treadmill. Their expectations and their lifestyle inflation expanded in perfect, lockstep synchronization with their income.
They got a promotion, so they leased a luxury SUV. They got a bonus, so they upsized the house.
Because they never defined a finish line. And without a finish line, enough is always just a little bit more than you currently have.
So what's the antidote?
The antidote is defining what material comfort constitutes genuine satisfaction before you earn your next raise. You decide objectively, a $350,000 home and a reliable paid-off car is enough for me.
Okay, so once you anchor that definition, any future jump in income, say, you go from 100K to 150K, that doesn't trigger a lifestyle upgrade.
Exactly. That entire $50,000 surplus flows directly into investments and savings.
And that surplus is what creates the ultimate goal of all these minimalist frameworks, which is optionality.
Yes. True wealth is not measured by the accumulation of objects. It is measured by optionality. Having liquid resources gives you the power of choice.
Can you afford to walk away from a toxic manager who is destroying your mental health?
Can you take 6 months off to care for an aging parent without panicking? Can you pivot careers and start your own business?
You cannot do any of those things if your capital is locked up in a depreciating luxury vehicle in the driveway. The person earning $200,000 but spending $195,000 has zero optionality.
They are entirely beholden to their next paycheck. Every time we succumb to a targeted ad for something we don't genuinely need, we aren't just trading money for an object. We are literally trading our future freedom and our ability to make choices.
That is such a profound realization. When you view your spending through the lens of optionality, the desire to impulse buy simply evaporates. You are addressing your core insecurities with actual financial strength rather than trying to soothe them with retail therapy.
It completely shifts your mindset.
I think that is the most empowering takeaway for the listener today. Minimalism, at least in this financial context, is not about deprivation. It is a virtuous cycle. When you build real liquid financial security, the psychological desperation to accumulate stuff just to signal your success to other people fades away.
Your bank account is telling you the story of security, so you no longer need your physical possessions to shout it for you.
Exactly. Now, to put this into practice without getting overwhelmed, what does the material recommend?
The key is cyclical decluttering. The traditional massive spring cleaning usually fails because people purge their house, feel virtuous for a month, and then slowly unconsciously buy it all back over the next year.
The rebound effect. It's like a crash diet for your house.
Precisely why it fails. Instead, integrate it cyclically. Remove just 3 unused items a week. Evaluate one specific category like your bathroom cabinets or your winter coats once a month.
Just a little bit at a time.
Right. It catches the accumulation early, it requires almost zero willpower, and it keeps you hyper-aware of your own consumption patterns.
3 items a week is incredibly achievable. And it brings us full circle back to those 2 apartments we envisioned at the start. It highlights the ultimate question. Do you want to own your possessions, or are you comfortable with your possessions owning you?
When you look at the stress levels and the bank balances of those 2 apartments, the math clearly favors the first option.
It really, really does. So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to mull over today. Think about the last major item you bought primarily to signal your success, or perhaps to just make yourself feel a little more secure in your status.
We all have one.
We do. Picture that exact item in your head right now. Imagine if that physical object suddenly vanished into thin air, but the exact dollar amount you paid for it instantly reappeared as liquid cash in your emergency fund. Would you really feel less secure? Or would that liquid cash actually buy you the genuine peace of mind that the physical object only promised? Something to think about.